Well, good evening. It's been 2.5 years since I stood before you, and I am thankful to be back. In the opening words of his letter to the Philippians, the Apostle Paul wrote, "I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine, for you all making my prayer with joy, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now." In that fall, in 2022, 2 months after TK and I were formally recognized as our Sending Church's South Korea mission team, we stood before you asking for your continual prayer, asking for your encouragement, and asking for your support. We asked for your partnership in the gospel. And brothers, we had no idea how much we really actually needed it. And your partnership in the gospel has far exceeded what we imagined from the first day until now. It's impossible for me, I was sharing this with some of the men at Berean, it's impossible for me to recall all the ways that this association has been directly or indirectly playing a role in the Reformed Baptist mission in South Korea. In one way or another, many of our relationships with other churches and associations outside of this region have come through your churches or have come through this association. And that includes most recently even our relationship with a publisher in the UK who has expressed a desire to help our publishing ministry in ways that are still hard for us to believe. And when it comes to last year's financial support, 34% of our total support from churches came from your congregations. And that doesn't include those who have supported us in addition as individual members of your congregations. And there are many, many generous members in your congregations. On behalf of Pastors Park and TK, and on behalf of our congregation, thank you for your love and your care for us. And thank you for your love and your care for the Reformed Baptist mission in South Korea. Truly, thank you. Now, I have to admit that referring to ourselves as the Reformed Baptist mission of South Korea is a self-described designation. The title, Reformed Baptist Mission of South Korea, hasn't been officially bestowed upon us by anyone, but we're convinced that to date, it's an accurate and helpful designation. I think one could similarly describe this association as the Reformed Baptist mission to the southeastern United States. And Lord willing, the Reformed Baptist mission in South Korea will one day enjoy a gathering such as these. But currently, as far as we know, we are the only constituted church in South Korea that fully subscribes to our confession. And this is in a country that is only 2/3 the size of the state of Georgia, with almost 5 times the population at 52 million people. The success of Christianity on the Korean Peninsula is well known. It has been described as arguably the most fruitful gospel movement in all of Asia over the last 100 years. And many of you are familiar with that. And a 3-point summary of that success usually goes something like this. First, almost 1/3 of all Koreans are Christian. But that 1/3 includes Roman Catholics and Protestants. And the Protestants include the cults, charismatics, liberals, and conservative denominations. That's number one. Almost 1/3 of South Koreans are Christian. Number two, Seoul has some of the largest churches in the world and almost tops the list for the number of megachurches in a city. But what qualifies as a Christian congregation? And who qualifies to be counted as a member of a congregation? What is membership in those congregations? What is the process of that membership? So that's number two. Number three, and except the United States, South Korea sends more missionaries than any other country. But what do you mean by missionary? What percentage of those called missionaries are really just philanthropists? What percentage are actually conservative Christians participating in the actual planting of true churches? The success of Reformed missionaries and the prevalence of and the accessibility to Reformed theology in Korea is well known. But what is often less well known is the nature of the theology and practice of the early Reformed missionaries. One Reformed missiology professor helpfully reminds us that, as with any church, younger or older, convictions are molded by those who plant the seed. And this is just as true in Korea as anywhere else. More than a few times I've heard it said that from the beginning, Korea has had a strong and significant confessional Reformed presence on the peninsula. And I think that needs to be qualified just a bit. Presbyterian mission work in Korea began in the early 1870s through the efforts of a Scottish Presbyterian named John Ross. And it was while John Ross was living in Manchuria that he had contact with Korea through Koreans along the border between what is modern-day North Korea and China. And it wasn't until Easter morning of 1885 that the first American Northern Presbyterian missionaries landed in Korea, most notably Horace Underwood. And yet, by 1892, the part of the church that began in the north region, through Ross, came under the care of the North American Presbyterian missionaries in the south. So you have a beginning of the work in the early 1870s. You have the arrival of the American Presbyterian missionaries in the mid-1880s, and then by early 1992, it all came under the control of the North American Presbyterian missionaries. But they weren't alone. The early Reformed missionary presence in Korea was complex. It was made up of 4 Presbyterian bodies, and these 4 bodies worked together. It included 2 from the United States, 1 from Canada, and 1 from Australia. And not only was there a partnership from the beginning, there was also a minority presence of liberal theology. And there was also, from the beginning, an ecumenical spirit among the missionaries. And this is seen early in their cooperation, not only with other Presbyterians, but non-Presbyterians. And it's also seen in their desire to create a unified church on the Korean peninsula. In 1905, about 30 to 35 years after the mission began in the northern regions, in 20 to 25 years after the mission began in the southern regions, a joint meeting of Presbyterian and Methodist missionaries was held. And at this joint meeting, it was unanimously affirmed that, quote, "It be the sense of this informal gathering of missionaries that the time is ripe for the establishment of one national Korean church to be called the Church of Christ in Korea." A few months later, the General Council of Evangelical Missions in Korea was formally established, and this made up 196 missionaries on the peninsula, which was about 95% of the total Protestant missionary presence. So we're not just talking about a few outliers. And their stated goal was, quote, "cooperation in mission, efforts, and eventually the organization in Korea of but one native evangelical church." According to the chairman of that council, there was, quote, "no difficulty in the way of harmonizing the doctrines of the Methodist and Presbyterian churches in Korea." That doesn't sound like the OPC to me. But 2 things stop this from being a reality. 1, the home mission boards. And 2, I think, more importantly, and the one that moves me more, were the Koreans. They didn't want it. Praise God. In the words of one author, the whole movement for union in those days raises the question as to just how strictly Calvinistic, or in the language I think we can use, the whole movement for union in those days raises the question as to just how Reformed and confessional the missionaries wanted the early church to be. End quote. And then you have the teaching of the first Reformed seminary, Pyongyang Seminary. This was established in 1907. And the teaching of the first Reformed seminary has been similarly questioned when it comes to the propagation of a distinctly Reformed theology. One that is faithful to the Reformed confessions. In 1958, referring to the early Presbyterian missions, one former faculty member of that seminary said, "As for their theological work, how much has been Calvinistic? I do not doubt the fact that they have tried to hand down a Calvinistic gospel to the later generations, but I don't think they were successful in this part of their work." And even others less critical less willing to state things so bluntly, have doubted one of the earliest Korean faculty members' own views when it comes to his convictions regarding Reformed theology. From 1905 to 1906, the union or the harmonization of the mission efforts under one Korean national church failed to be realized. And in 1907, the first presbytery meeting of the Korean church was held, and they adopted a confession, but not the Westminster Confession of Faith. This confession that they adopted, it contained 12 articles, and it has been described as having a strong Calvinistic trend. It wasn't until 1963 that the first Korean Presbyterian denomination formally adopted the Westminster Confession of Faith as part of their official constitution. When it comes to the issues of theology and biblical criticism of that day, the typical Reformed missionary was a strong conservative, but also held premillennialist views of Christ's second coming. Sadly, the dispensationalism taught among many fundamentalist Presbyterians at that same time in America was also brought to Korea by the earliest, most prominent Reformed missionaries. The Canadian James Gale and the American Horace Underwood have been mentioned in connection to this. The theology of the early Reformed church in Korea has been described as inconsistent Presbyterianism, inconsistent Reformed theology. And the theology and practice of the often well-known ecumenical revivals that culminated in 1907 are no exception. Influences of Wesleyan Finian perfectionism, higher life or Keswick theology were all present in some of the most prominent early Reformed missionaries during that time. As one author wrote, even Presbyterians who subscribe to the Westminster Confession of Faith season their Calvinism with a generous dash of Keswick. And although these Reformed missionaries claimed that they were not looking for anything unusual in the revivals, their language and practices betray their search for an extra or additional experience that had to come from something other than the ordinary means of grace. And regarding the success of the revivals, in the words of one author, quote, despite unsubstantiated claims that the revival brought 50,000 Koreans to Christ, the evidence suggests that it did not produce significant numerical church growth. The toleration of ideas associated with higher life or Keswick theology, which at their core are not consistent with a Reformed view of sanctification. The toleration of these ideas were also accompanied by the toleration of theological liberalism, almost from the beginning. This was in the Presbyterian missions themselves, as well as in their relationships with other denominational missions. The question about how Reformed or consistently faithful to the Reformed faith described in the confessions, the question about how Reformed were the early Presbyterian missionaries, or to put it in terms that I hear often again, whether or not from the beginning Korea has had a strong or significant confessional reform presence on the peninsula? Well, to put it indirectly in a very polite Korean English way, it's complicated. It's a little difficult. Maybe in a polite southeastern way, it's questionable. Or as my Uncle Jack from New York would say, forget about it. It's not as simple as it's often assumed to be. Today you will find conservative confessional Reformed churches that in theology and practice closely resemble similar circles of churches here in the U.S. You will find those churches today. However, they are a significantly smaller portion of what goes on under the label of Reformed than is often realized. Just like here, just like in the United States. Now, the beginning of Baptistic efforts on the peninsula is often traced to the early 1900s and a Canadian missionary named Malcolm Fenwick. Fenwick, like many of his missionary contemporaries, was conservative when it came to his views of Scripture and the gospel. However, he too, like most around him, was ecumenical in his relationships and partnerships, and he too was influenced by higher life, Keswick theology, dispensationalism, and a centralized denominational system that appointed ministers in the churches. But he did hold the believer's baptism. Today's Korean Baptist Convention, which our congregation belongs to, was formally established in 1949 with the assistance and affiliation of the Southern Baptist Convention. And although among the 3,400 churches in the Korean Baptist Convention, you will find faithful churches and pastors of a broad, non-reformed evangelical tradition, in the KBC, we don't have the number of Calvinistic and covenantal churches and pastors like you do in the Southern Baptist Convention. There are men who are becoming more familiar with the literature being produced by 9 Marks. There are men who are Calvinistic, but they're very few in number. And this is why we say that the propagation of Reformed Baptist theology and practice that has taken place in North America and elsewhere over the last 60 years is only just beginning in South Korea. And as I mentioned in my introduction, we are the only constituted Second London Church in South Korea. So the success of Christianity on the Korean Peninsula is well known. But what is often less well known is the present state of theology and practice in the local churches in South Korea. Two years ago, while TK and I were visiting the association in Southern California, we met with Westminster Seminary President Joel Kim. And President Kim came to the United States from South Korea when he was young, but he has always remained connected to and well-informed about Korea and about Korean culture, and especially the Korean church. And as we were sitting in his office, filling him in on all that was going on and all of our youthful hopes and dreams. He became really quiet, and gazing off into the distance, he said simply, "Korea is a hard field." And that resonated with me. And to hear him say that, that shook me. It shook me because I had just enough experience in Korea to understand the gravity of that seemingly simple statement. Since the late 1800s, Korea has been greatly influenced by ideas and cultures outside of East Asia. But to this day, the Korean mind at the popular level and Korea at the national level, the national culture, the popular culture is made up of century-old fundamental ideas. And these ideas are foundational for what people think, what people say, and what people do, thus influencing the way people think, the way people say things, and the way people do things. And churches and Christians are not immune to this. In fact, this has been an obstacle for Christians and churches in Korea from the beginning. To this day, typical South Korean churches and Christians adhere to a syncretistic blend of indigenous spiritualism, Confucianism, and Christianity. And this includes the most conservative, confessional, Reformed churches that those outside of Korea have so often heard about. This includes our church, by the way. We still have tendencies. For churches and Christians, these century-old ideas are the source of the many tendencies that create the many challenges they face when seeking to obey God rather than man. Some of these tendencies are syncretism, hierarchies, collectivism, insider-outsider mindsets, and indirectness rather than directness in communication. Syncretism. Syncretism, for the Korean, is often subconscious. It's a subconscious mixing of different ideas and practices to meet one's particular needs for a particular situation. And the notion that one must choose one religious system and exclude the ideas and practices from all other systems is seen as unnecessary. And that idea, that tendency of syncretism it goes back to the ages before the kingdoms in Korea. It's old, and it's part of the broader East Asian mind historically. So that's syncretism. This is why it's not unusual to meet a Christian in Korea that believes that Christ is important for the saving of their soul, but Christianity has little or no help for the problem of his or her life. When it comes to personal relationships, it's not Christ, it's Confucius. So that's syncretism, hierarchies. Some refer to the notion of hierarchies in Korean culture as the Korean Confucian caste system, in which everyone knows their place, everyone knows who's above them, everyone knows who's below them. And this starts at a very young age. And when you see it at a young age, it's somewhat comical for an outsider. We have 4- and 5-year-old girls in the congregation that when they get in an argument, they like to remind each other who's Unni, who's the older sister in the argument. And they're 3, 4 years old, 5 years old. Some Korean parents have told my wife that if you just get the hierarchy figured out between the two boys, everything else will be just fine. Well, what do you do if you've got a younger brother who is just not quite as submissive to the older brother? They figure it out. They figure it out. So everyone knows their place, and this begins at a young age. And within these, and because of these hierarchies, you can only develop genuine, open, comfortable relationships with those who are usually of the same age, or once you get older, maybe past your 60s, of that generation. It's usually after retirement. But in many cases, you can only develop these relationships, genuine, sincere, open relationships, with those who have a similar social status as you and or your family. So that's hierarchies. Collectivism. In collectivism, cohesion, harmony, and unity are the greatest goods. And what is right and wrong is determined by what promotes or disrupts the cohesion and harmony. As one author puts it, one cannot act independently. That would show great disrespect and be dangerous to the harmony of the group. Which leads to, so that's collectivism, which leads to insider-outsider mindsets. Well, what if someone acts independently? Insider-outsider mindsets. Failure to meet the collective circle's expectations, failure to submit to the hierarchy of the collective whole, is failure to promote the harmony, failure to promote the unity, which makes you the uneven stone. And as the Korean proverb goes, the uneven stone gets the hammer. You'll conform or be made an outsider. And being made an outsider is shameful and among the worst evils one can endure. Collectivism leads to insider-outsider mindset. Collectivism also leads to indirectness rather than directness in communication. In individualistic cultures, you say what you think. You say what you mean what you say. And if you don't say what you think, and if you don't say what you mean and mean what you say, it's a bad thing. But in a collectivistic culture like Korea, that sort of directness is seen as selfish. It's rude. It can fail to acknowledge and respect the hierarchy. And here you have to remember, whatever promotes harmony and unity is right, and whatever disrupts harmony and unity harmony and unity is wrong. And if your direct speech is disrupting that harmony and unity, it's wrong. So you need to be more indirect. It only took me about 13 years to figure this stuff out in my marriage, by the way. So we've been married, this year will be 18 years. And since moving to Korea 5 years ago, my marriage has gotten a lot better. These tendencies are some of the unique challenges we face in the church in Korea when seeking to obey God rather than man. Because when these tendencies reign, as the title of one book goes, people are big and God is small. So how are we to respond? Well, in the Spirit of Christ and in the language of Scripture, we must respond with compassion and teaching. Our mission has been and will continue to be to reach unbelievers as well as sheep in need of greener pasture with the gospel and to teach them all that the Lord has commanded. We are convinced that a biblical and confessional understanding of the regulated worship of God, a proper understanding of the law, the gospel, and I would add to that Christian liberty, a proper understanding of baptism and the Lord's Supper, and a proper understanding of church order are exactly they are exactly the truths we need for the modern Korean soul in this context. And we believe that meeting that need is fulfilled in the planting and shepherding of local churches. We believe that the planting and shepherding of local churches is the propagation of the faith. It is the illuminating of the nations, the fulfilling of the Great Commission. As you know, in December of 2022, our church experienced a major disruption. And through that disruption, half of our adult members left, and the church practically dissolved. But it was while the church was going through this trial that it became very clear to Pastor Park and those who remained that the church needed to reform its theology and practice in some important areas of church government. And in February 2023, TK was able to move up into the city. He joined Pastor Park and me at the church, and the three of us began working together to reform and replant NSRBC, Known Sola Reformed Baptist Church. And by God's grace, we've been able to do just that. Last August, we formally replanted the church with a new church order, a new covenanted membership, and a new plurality and parity of pastors in which Pastor Park, TK, and I were installed as co-elders. And currently, our attendance is ranging between upper 30s to lower 40s, 18 of whom are members. In November, to help meet the need for Reformed Baptist resources in Korean, both in our congregation but also in the broader Reformed Baptist mission in Korea, we formalized our publishing ministry, where Pastors Park, TK, and a fellow church member, Sean Denny, and I are working to address the need for these resources. As I mentioned in my introduction, we have already established relationship with a publisher in the UK, and I had a hopeful conversation with a publisher in the US as well. And we're hopeful that, at least through the partnership in the UK, that we can have a number of Reformed Baptist resources in print in Korean by the end of this year. 2 of our projects in their final stages were translated by TK. One is Benjamin Keach's The Glory of a True Church, and the other is Nehemiah Cox's sermon preached at the ordination of an elder and deacons. And by final stages, Sean and TK are finishing their final copy editing before we send it to the UK. In addition to these 2 projects, TK is continuing his translation of Samuel Renahan's The Mystery of Christ, and Sean is translating Ryan Davidson's Green Pastures, Ordinary Means of Grace for Ordinary Believers. Additional projects that are planned for this year are Before the Foundation of the World by Jeff Riddle and God Without Passions by Sam Renahan, and, Lord willing, True Love by James Renahan. Let me introduce you just for a moment to Sean Denny. Sean Denny is a Canadian citizen, and he is married to his wife, Haejin. And Haejin was born and raised in Korea. They met in Canada. Sean is in his middle 40s, and before he met his wife in Canada, he completed a bachelor's degree in Korean studies at the University of Toronto in his early 20s. That's where he began learning about Korean history, culture, and studying the Korean language. He then went on to complete his master's in Korean studies at the University of Toronto. And a couple of years ago, he finished his PhD in Korean church history, also at the University in Toronto. Sean came to us. Sean and his family found our church online, and they began commuting to the church until the Lord opened the door for him to move into the city through employment at a local university. Sean's family is a gift to our church for all the reasons that a large, healthy Christian family, they have 5 children, a large, healthy Christian family, for all those reasons that they are a gift to the church. But to say that he is a gift to a budding Reformed Baptist movement in a congregation of 18 members would be an understatement. He's an expert in Korean. He teaches Korean at a Korean university to foreigners who come to go to school in Korea. And he started attending a month after the disruption. Through the encouragement, counsel, and financial aid of our supporting churches and individuals, the Lord has sustained us. And the Reformed Baptist Mission in South Korea is moving forward and building on a more solid foundation. For the remainder of this year, Pastor Park will continue in his role as our primary Lord's Day preacher and teacher, with TK's help as needed. And in addition to helping with the pastoral needs of the church and teaching Lord's Day education classes, TK will be focusing primarily on the publishing ministry. He will be the primary overseer and participate in the expansion and completion of translation projects. And in order to help establish a future learning community, in March, he will be continuing his education at a local Christian university, writing a thesis under a Reformed Presbyterian professor who studied under Richard Muller. In addition to helping with the pastoral needs of the church and also teaching a Lord's Day education class, upon my return to Korea, I plan to enter language school full-time in order to attain the language proficiency necessary for effective long-term ministry in Korea. Originally, the plan was for me to enter language school full-time at the beginning of 2023. However, due to the disruption, the reforming, the replanting of the church, and raising support for the mission team, I've only been able to study part-time with a Korean teacher. However, I plan to start my full-time language studies this June with minimal distraction and disruptions. As frustrating as that sometimes is for me, the relationship that we established with my part-time Korean teacher that came about because I couldn't go to language school. That relationship over the course of a year and a half led to her attending our covenant ceremony in August. And from that point on, she's come every weekend. And in December, along with another woman, also in her early 60s, we added them to the church. And in a collectivistic culture like South Korea, where you don't congregate with those who are unlike you in terms, first and foremost, your age or generation, adding these two sisters who are 15 to 20 years older, 25 years older than some of our members, is not a small thing. People call Pastor Park and they ask him, do you have anybody in their 50s? Do you have anybody in their 60s? No, we don't, but we'd love to have you. Click. It's just how it goes. So it's significant. And the other sister that we added in December, her husband is attending regularly, which is significant, as well as her adult children from time to time. In those seemingly small things, even those seemingly small things have been a great encouragement to us. In 2026, we would like to begin hosting an annual theology conference in order to increase visibility and raise awareness among those in South Korea and possibly the broader region. And all of this still, as we told you when we stood before you in 2022, all of this with an eye towards the next Reformed Baptist church plant, and with our current congregation forming an association of Reformed Baptist churches in South Korea under the Second London Confession. As I'm sure you can imagine, the past 2 years have often been overwhelming, but in the midst of and from out of great disruption, our triune God has done a great work among us. And he has sustained us. And he has sustained us through the prayers, through the encouragement, and through the support of other Reformed Baptist churches like yours. Please join us in giving thanks and praise to God for what he has accomplished among us in the church in Daejeon. Please pray for Pastors Park, TK, and me. I have only been there 5 years. I am very much an outsider. I can feel the difficulty of ministering in that collectivistic culture. I find myself needing to be courageous in ways I never thought I would have to be. So pray for us men. Pray for conviction. Pray for courage. But also pray for carefulness. We need to be careful when we are seeking to lead Christians living in Korea along in these ways, and pray for clarity. Pray for the peace and sanctification of our congregation, and please pray for the publishing ministry. And pray for the Lord to sustain me through language school. I've taken a class like the one I'm going to take. It's 10 weeks long. I hope to do 2 classes back to back. It's 10 weeks long. It's Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., and it's at a local university. It is 20 college lecture hours, credit hours a week of Korean language lectures, study. It is exhausting. It's not meant for a 40-year-old with 2 children. At 2 p.m., I feel like it's 6 p.m. And to be completely honest, those 10 weeks were some of the most darkest. They were some of the most darkest weeks in my adult life. It's just hard. So, I have made great progress in the language over the last year and a half. Please pray for me in that regard. I need to grow more and more in the language. Please pray for our current church visitation trip and our safe return to Korea. Last time I was with you, it was just me and the boys, and I don't know if I ever thanked whoever it was. I think it might have been Robin, actually. I think he saved one of my kids from setting himself on fire outside of the church at Lookout Mountain. I was inside and the kids were just outside waving flaming sticks around. But anyways, I think it was Robin, one of them. I don't think that'll be happening again because I have my wife with me. And the boys are also not wearing the same clothes every day. So we are in the States together, visiting churches until the end of April. Prior to coming down here, we were in the Midwest. In a couple of weeks, we'll be making our way up the Mid-Atlantic by car, onto New England, and then eventually flying to the Southwest before returning to Korea at the end of April. And with that, please pray for local church partnerships, for our 2025 mission team support, and for our needed funds for the publishing ministry, so that we can be free to focus on all these things. In 1908, pioneer reform missionary to Korea, Horace Underwood, he published a book titled The Call of Korea. His hope for that book, in his own words, was that it would enable the Christian church to hear the call of Korea and to lead the churches in America to send reinforcements. Brothers and sisters, as you already know, we continue to need help. It's difficult to imagine the Reformed Baptist movement in South Korea today without this association behind us. You were the first association behind us. And there might even come a time when we will need people to come and help. And so it is my hope that in these meetings with you, that these few words that I'm able to speak with you all, even tonight, will be the beginning of another call to Korea. So please, commit to praying for this also, that our triune God, who has begun a good work in Korea, would raise up men and women who would be willing and able to die unto their life in this land and rise unto a new life in the land of the morning calm for his church in Korea. Thank you.